Welcome to Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Philip Gawthorne, and with me as always is Liam Billingham, and today's film is The Relic.
It's Die Hard in a museum with a monster. Words I never thought I'd say for people to hear together. This is a very special episode. We have a very special guest straight from South America, the Cthulhu, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my God.
It's got a lot of insights.
Every time we get worse and worse and more like schlocky radio DJs. No, our actual guest is our friend Brandon Streussnig, who's written for Vulture. He created the Action Movie Awards. He's written for Fangoria. He loves his art films. He loves his action movies. And he's a proud member of the Hyams Hive, Brandon. Is that
Hyams Hive,
accurate to say?
I am of Peter and John.
Yes. Yeah, you are a well, first of all, thanks for being here. This is so great. We've been talking about this for a while. I feel like I think I messaged you like 6 months ago to be like, we need you for the Relic.
Yeah, no, this has been an ongoing conversation. Yeah, so I'm very excited to talk about this one. But I love. I actually think I came to the Hyams Hive through John first, like years ago, seeing his two Universal Soldier movies, and then like I knew who Peter Hyams was. No, actually, that's not true. Let me go back. Being a Pittsburgher, of course, I've seen Sudden Death, and I love Sudden Death. So that was the only Peter Hyams I had seen for the longest time, and then just kind of worked backwards a little bit.
Yeah, I think what prompted this is one day you tweeted. We should all say that Brandon tweets anything and it's like explodes. Like,
and
it's
one of
unbelievable.
the funniest, legitimately one of the funniest people on that godforsaken platform.
That awful
Your
platform.
tweets are hilarious. I love
Thank you.
them.
That's very kind of you.
And never controversial. That's one thing we could say. They never get any attention.
Yeah, I can show my girlfriend any movie and it just goes over smoothly.
It's totally normal. Yeah, I remember what prompted this was you tweeted about, I think, Capricorn 1. And then you tweeted about the Relic. And I was like, oh, there's some Hyams Hive going on here.
Yeah.
And I was Hyams Hive draws people towards it like a moth to a flame.
And this is our third Hyams film, right, Phil?
Have we done? I know we've done. Oh, yes, you're right.
Narrow Margin.
I forgot about Narrow Margin,
banger.
which is great. Sudden Death, which I'm kind of mixed on, but this is great. I legitimately love this movie.
Oh, this movie rocks.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, and I really think Peter Hyams is, I mean, I love him. His commentaries are great. He's a really interesting guy. He's worked with so many brilliant big movie stars. He's worked in a bunch of different genres, and the fact that he shoots his own stuff and often writes or co-writes, really, really important and kind of slept on figure. But I think now there is the Hyams Hive is like a real thing. There's a lot of appreciation, I think, for his work.
Well, this is a classic thing that we've been talking about lately, which is that it's a 5-star, 3-star movie. Like, which, I attribute to Corey Atad, but like just the idea that like, well, he said it about Con Air, which as we all know is a 5-star movie, but
10-star movie.
This is like a 5-star, 3-star movie to T. And also, Phil, to your point, the fact that he shoots his own movies really excites me because when like I watch these massive shots, helicopter shots of the Chicago Museum and all this, it feels like, there's just one guy behind the camera doing all of this. It's not true, but it feels exciting. It really feels like
they're very authored for the fact that he's sort of this journeyman that moves between different genres and styles. His stuff, he has a really strong hold on the creative of a lot of these films, especially because he is behind the visual aesthetic. But Brandon, with this movie then, just want to, we always start by asking about your our relationships with the film that we're discussing. Had you seen this before? Do you remember when you first saw it?
I had seen it a little while ago. I came to Peter Hyams late, which always bums me out, other than Sudden Death, which was like a staple in my household. This one I had seen maybe a few years ago, but probably I have memories, I want to say, of this playing on cable at some point when I was a kid. Like I have memories of the monster, like the creature design. So I'm pretty sure I might have seen it then, but yeah, this was one that, I've been doing a little bit of a Hyams like deep dive earlier this year, but I had seen this one a few years ago, and rewatching it again, for this, just like it really reminded me of just how it's just such a tight movie. There's no fat on it at all. It's kind of crazy.
Do you have a favorite Hyams out of interest?
That's tough because I love Outland. I think Outland's like just such a great Western. Like I watched that right around the same time I was watching the Bud Bedecker box set that Criterion put out of all his Westerns. And I was just in such a zone for that. And Outland like really blew me away. But one I like always shout out to people as like just a really great movie that I don't think ever gets enough credit is, especially because it's a sequel to one of the greatest movies ever made, is 2010, The Year We Make Contact.
Great movie.
Great movie.
Excellent. Yeah, I think if I'm pushed, that might be his best movie, but it's
probably
tough.
his most ambitious.
Yeah,
and brave.
Yeah.
You know, to try and do a sequel to a Kubrick movie and kind of pull it off.
Yeah.
You know, especially I think the ending of that movie is really amazing and
It's
such
incredible.
a great cast.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm rocking my Con-Am t-shirt in as I'm contractually obligated to do for the Hyams Hive because I love Outland as well. I think Outland is amazing.
Great. Yeah.
And Outland's kind of in the conversation right now because it feels very parallel to the new Alien movie in and how it almost feels like it's part of the same universe to some extent with that aesthetic, the mining colony, the brutal corporation pressing down on people, etc., and the way that they're all living in there.
My favorite sci-fi is the kind of stuff that has like working class guys, like, and it feels like, you're just watching like, guys at like the steel mill, but they happen to be in space. And I feel like Hyams sci-fi, even 2010 has that kind of feeling, even though those are scientists in that movie, obviously. I still feel like Roy Scheider just inherently has like a working class kind of vibe to him.
Yeah.
Well, so does Tom Sizemore, and there's certainly some of that in this movie. The way it juxtaposes like the well-heeled people showing up for the gala, and
the affinity for the working class is something very Die Hard, very Tony Scott, something that I love to see in movies. Liam, were you a big Relic guy?
So I saw this.
You should have that on a t-shirt.
A Relic guy.
I'm a big Relic guy.
I'm a big Relic guy.
People will flock towards you.
Yeah, I'm gonna order that while I talk about my relationship with this movie. I saw this in the theater. I have a very clear memory of seeing it with my buddy Brian, who I've talked about on this show before. And I also have read the book. I read the book when the movie came out, and I have actually a very distinct memory. I don't remember the book because I was 1997, so it's a million years ago. But I remember reading the book and I remember reading the passage where the Cthulhu, who's in the studio with us today, first shows up in the book. And he starts eating someone. Like, I remember sitting on my couch and like sitting up during that section. So I have a very visceral memory of this. And then I revisited it kind of randomly last year when I was on Paramount Plus, and it was one of those like we did not know how good we had it in 1997 because this movie kicks ass. And I remember when it came out, I was like, yeah, cool, like that was cool. I had a good time watching that. But now I'm like, this is like a 5-star, 3-star movie.
It's funny that you brought up the book just because when you mentioned how when I tweet everyone's normal, I tweeted that I was watching this movie the other day and this person was nice, but it just was funny to me. I had just read that it was based on a book right before I tweeted that I was watching, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then, most of the replies were people just saying like, oh yeah, this is a banger, great movie. But then one person went on like a multi-tweet thread in my replies about how this like is a disgrace to the book, and I'm just like, and he wasn't
go outside.
But it's what's funny is he wasn't mad at me about it, but he was like, but I'm glad you like the movie. But I was just reading these and I was like, man, I had no idea that anyone had such serious thoughts on the Relic novel. Like, very funny.
Yeah, it's pretty disposable, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, it's a great plain book, or like a great like sitting around. Like when you're what was I 15 in 1997? It was the coolest thing ever. But like, it's like people haven't understood that literature and cinema are different art forms.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's
down.
like you can't. I know that might break your brain a little bit, but just hear me out. Right? A book and a movie are different. A book is going to be
and the book features
9 hours long.
The book features an FBI agent who's a recurring character in the Lee Child and Douglas Preston series.
Really?
Who Hyams? Yeah, I forget his name. But Hyams cuts him out, but he's essentially the main character in the book.
Interesting.
But I think wisely, to your point, Phil, he was like, I don't have room. We're not building a franchise here. We're making a one-off monster movie to release, in January.
One and done.
So with that, should we do our top line
Yeah, we'll
facts?
do our, my relationship with the movie is just very brief.
Oh, yes.
And, but I was a huge, Tom Sizemore was my favorite actor of this era. So I was all over this movie and I saw it when it came out. I can't remember if I saw it at the theater or not, but I've been across this movie for a long time. But yeah, this is Rumor Control. Here are the facts. I'm just saying that because Liam saw Alien 3 this week. So for the first time,
I saw Alien 3 for the first time this week.
Wow.
I've had a great monster week for movies.
Yeah, that's a good movie.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
So great. So despite the original poster, which featured a picture of the museum in the year 1996, fantastic poster, by the way, just the museum and like red emerging from it. It's really, really evocative, that poster. The Relic was actually released in the US by Paramount on January 10th, 1997, same release date as Turbulence, our last film, and approximately 1 month after Daylight.
Brandon, are you a Turbulence guy? Sorry, I just have to ask.
It's been a while since I've seen that one. That was a cable classic.
3-star, 5-star.
Yeah, I remember really enjoying that. Yeah.
It was produced by Gail Ann Hurd and the legendary Gail Ann Hurd and Sam Mercer. Screenplay by Amy Holden Jones, John Raffo, Rick Jaffa, Amanda Silver, 4 credited screenwriters, all of whom were adapting the aforementioned 1996 novel just entitled Relic, by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Of course, directed by the great Peter Hyams, who again acted as his own cinematographer, and it stars Penelope Ann Miller, Tom Sizemore, Linda Hunt, James Whitmore, and Clayton Rona. On an estimated budget of, this is weird because there's actually no definitive budget.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's between 40 and 60 is the estimated based on reports. And it grossed 48 million theatrically, but was considered a success, I think, and went on to have a sustained life within the rental market and cable, and has been kind of in and around the culture ever since. But those are our fast facts. Again, some people might be wondering, like, is this a stretch for a Die Hard movie?
And we say, who cares?
We say, shut up. Go over there. We wanted to talk about the Relic.
The person who's asking this is the same person who went on a rant on Brandon's Twitter.
Nothing lasts forever. It's very different from the book of Die Hard. Yes, it fucking is.
Welcome to Rants, a podcast.
Rantcast. So we like to address those concerns very respectfully in a section that we like to call
Die Hard DNA.
Speaking of books that were adapted to movies, it was different from the book. Jurassic Park. That movie sucked.
Phil, relax. Just chill out.
So, Die Hard DNA. These were the things that I caught that actually would connect the two films. Obviously, they're primarily around, there's around one central location. But to dig a little deeper, we've got during a lavish party, right, featuring champagne, canapes, string music. Mayhem suddenly erupts, and a diverse group of ordinary people are trapped inside a large urban building and terrorized. You got the police and the authorities gathering outside, surrounding the building, but they're largely unable to help. The main character is a cop, specifically a detective from a major urban city who has significant problems in his personal life. We find out, the Tom Sizemore character is going through a divorce or his custody hearing for his dog, Jerry. Supporting character who engages in recreational drug use is brutally killed. Ellis in Die Hard, Freddy the guard in The Relic. The assault team who launch a dynamic entry on the building are immediately slaughtered. That's what we've come to know and love in any Die Hard on a Blank movie. And then, more superficially, you've just got lots of running around in dark corridors to avoid detection, helicopters flying around the building, huge spotlights being pointed at the building. They're shooting at the lights. Power grid shutdowns, the use of improvised explosive devices, lens flares a go-go. This whole movie is shot in the dark, and there's so many lens flares.
I just love the idea that they're putting the budget together. they're like putting the budget together, and they're like, Peter, how much do you want to spend on lights? And he's like, $0, which obviously is not the case, but it feels so natural, right? It feels like it was lit
like
by whatever's around.
The Barry Lyndon of horror, right? And then the last one that I caught that was an interesting one was you've got trigger-happy beat cops shooting people who may be entirely innocent, which of course is Al Powell's backstory. But what happens when Tico Wells, the Tico Wells character, who's one of the uniformed cops, guns down that homeless man, it kind of had like, it was like, that seemed a little excessive, and it had real echoes of Al Powell's ray gun story.
Is he Rosencrantz or Guildenstern? Have we decided?
Good question. I'm not sure. I haven't decided which one of the two he is. But we will get to them because they're actually my favorite part of the whole movie. But those were Die Hard connections that I caught. Did you guys catch anything else or have any thoughts about the connections between this movie and the 1988 OG?
Well, I don't think a lot of people know this, but this was like Alan Rickman and Die Hard, with that being his first movie. This was the Cathoga's first movie, which I found interesting.
Now, Cathoga, how were you discovered?
The Cathoga was like, I think he did Dangerous Liaisons.
He played Richard II. It was a small production, but he was very good in it. Yeah.
Classic. Rather educated actor.
What's that smell? My head flies off. I knew we shouldn't have let him in the studio. His rider asked for 50 hypothalamuses. It was insane.
We'll dig into this in a bit more detail with the help of the Cathoga after this quick break.
God, we're so annoying.
And we're back with our next section of the show, Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we explore the tenets.
We live in a Twilight world.
And there are no friends at dusk. Brandon, Tenet, thumbs up, thumbs down?
I like it. That's a tough one because I saw it. I've only ever seen it at home because of the whole weird release with that movie. And I would love to see it on a big screen one day. I'm getting closer to loving it. Everyone keeps telling me that, like, some of my closest friends are like, this is Nolan's Miami Vice. You have to love it. And I'm like, I don't know. I see that a little bit, but I'm getting there. I don't have anything against Nolan. I love Interstellar. That's one of my favorite movies, but I don't know what it is.
Getting a re-release this fall.
I'm very excited about that.
Me too.
But Tenet, I think, is one that I'm going to come to like a year from now and be like, oh yeah, this is great. But now I really like it.
It's not as good as the book.
It's a book about inversion that you're actually describing. We went and saw
it's a textbook.
We did they did a 70mm re-release, and we were lucky enough to be near the City Walk, so we went and saw it, and it was like euphoric.
Oh man,
it was.
I mean, I was like levitating for the entire 2.5 hours. I couldn't,
especially with the music as well. Just the immersion of that movie. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Tenet. We're here to talk about the Relic. So the first anatomy of an action movie, the first tenets rather of anatomy of an action movie is the premise, and the premise of the Relic, for anyone unfamiliar, is as far as it's slightly convoluted. After experimenting with psychotropic drugs while on a trip to South America, anthropologist John Whitney makes an alarming discovery and attempts to prevent the return of several crates of research material to the US. Weeks later, the crates arrive and are sent to their intended destination at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, an area which is suddenly beset with a series of grisly murders. As Detective Vincent D'Agosta, Tom Sizemore, and don't mispronounce his name, investigates, he and evolutionary biologist Dr. Margot Green, Penelope Ann Miller, come to the horrifying realization that a literal monster is now on the loose and that they and dozens of other citizens are now trapped inside the museum along with the marauding beast. And the ticking clock is, can D'Agosta and Green find a way to defeat this seemingly unkillable mutant monster and escape the museum before it slaughters them all? So, what do you think of? I mean, that's a more convoluted way to say this is about a monster in a museum, and But there's some of the setup is kind of interesting, and we talk. You sent me an interesting article, Liam, about like what.
Did you read it?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Can you explain a little bit
for context? So because I didn't send it to you last night, Brandon, but last night I was watching this again, and I found this article on the sci-fi.com that was essentially like, this movie is about how you shouldn't take things that don't belong to you, and sort of like looks at it from the like, you know, Indiana Jones is all about like the glories of archaeology or anthropology, and this is kind of about like maybe don't steal, you know, indigenous objects from places. I mean, it's a stretch to say that this movie is really getting into that, but it does use it as like a nice backbone for a monster to eat a bunch of people and rip their heads off repeatedly.
I think that's a great read of it. Again, it's probably a stretch. Who knows if that was the intention? I mean, but I don't know. I think at the same time, like, again, this is in a later point of Peter Hyams' career where he's maybe not doing his best work, although I love him dearly, but I still think a lot of his movies are very, political and have heavy political themes. And I think especially his early work, a lot of that sci-fi stuff is very political. So, I mean, I don't know if it could be a stretch to say that about this movie, but with him, I would never discount that because I do think he's a very openly political filmmaker, even though he's a journeyman action director for the most part. Yeah.
It's an interesting aspect of the film, but what I'm actually more interested in discussing than its themes is the subgenre that this is part of. I would suggest that, although Die Hard contains some horror-esque moments, in particular, like towards the end when McClane's covered in head to toe in blood and when Carl comes back from the dead, a la Michael Myers, this is our first out-and-out horror movie. And this is a rare entry in the Die Hard on a Blank canon for an action horror movie. This really interesting subgenre that would go on to, there'd be other films that would fall into this. I would suggest that you could make the case that they're Die Hard adjacent, like Resident Evil or Doom, for example. But I'm really interested, and also what's really interesting about this subgenre is one of the great entries in it would be Predator, directed by John McTiernan, of course, before he made Die Hard. There's also this strong connection to James Cameron and his early like action horror films like Terminator and Aliens through his partner, both in life and work, Gale Hurd. Her presence feels very like integral to this movie. And I was trying to think about, well, this is such an interesting genre, and appropriately, it's sort of a mutating genre that's, evolved over time. But I was trying to think, what is the first action horror movie? The first one that I could think of, and I want to get your opinion, it would be Dawn of the Dead, the 1978 George Romero movie, because the definition that I found of action horror is, quote, a subgenre combining the intrusion of an evil force, event, or supernatural personage of horror films with the gunfights and frenetic chases of the action genre. And with Dawn of the Dead being, the character, I mean, that Dawn of the Dead is fairly special all the way. Two of the characters are in a SWAT team. The other is a helicopter pilot and the reporter. There's a lot of like running around and shooting. Even though that doesn't feel like an action, it feels very much a horror film. It's all about dread. There is a strong action element to it. So do you have any thoughts on the genre, and are there any other ones that might be, antecedents of, of where this all began, the action horror kind of hybrid genre?
I think Dawn of the Dead's a great call. While you were talking, I was running through my head, like trying to think of what could be the first. And that feels probably right to me that it would be Dawn of the Dead. Because of course you have Terminator, that, that's a straight up slasher movie, and Aliens is obviously, but I think Dawn of the Dead would probably be the first one. And I think there's such a great overlap with horror and action, because I think the way you choreograph kills in both can be very similar. And I think some of my favorite filmmakers are able to kind of combine the two. While you were just running that down, I was thinking of one of my favorite current filmmakers is Timo Giajanto, who, Night Comes for Us. And I think he does it very interestingly, where like, I think Night Comes for Us is an action movie first that is so horrific that it feels like a horror movie. But then his actual horror movies, May the Devil Take You, the kills feel like fight scenes, and that's a straight up horror movie. And so I think that it's very fun when someone can kind of thread those needles. I was also thinking of, this is a little later than The Relic, but Dog Soldiers is definitely a great action horror movie. The poster you have behind you, Underwater, I think is an action horror movie, a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I can't think of any, I was trying to think, like, does anyone have a gun in Psycho that they fire off? I was running through my head of trying to think of what could be realistically the first one, but I think Dawn of the Dead's a good pull, like, because it's also it feels so different from Night of the Living Dead too. Like Night of the Living Dead feels like a straight up, slow moving, kind of one setting horror movie where, Dawn of the Dead's what setting also, but Dawn of the Dead feels much more electric than Night of the Living Dead. And I think that's always fun when there's like a leap like that. Like, Alien to Aliens and everything.
The other point that I wanted to make about this as well, I'm glad you kind of agree that hopefully that was like, I can't think of anything before that would qualify, but I could be wrong. We're interested to hear our listeners' opinions if they have thoughts on that. But the other thing about the horror genre and where this fits in and how this connects to Die Hard as well is one of the things I love about this. I'm a horror fan, but I wouldn't say I'm like the most, rabid horror fan. But my favorite horror films are ones that I could watch even if there was no horror element because I love the characters so much. The prototypical example of that for me is John Carpenter's The Fog.
I was going to say John Carpenter. Right? Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I could spend time with those characters in that town even if there was no supernatural element.
That's exactly why that's one of my favorites of his too. That setting is perfect.
It's great. The characters are so Hulu interesting, series, and the dynamics are so interesting, and the setting and the milieu is so interesting. I think this film has some of that, and I enjoy spending time with like just them pottering about the museum. If this was a show that was called Chicago Homicide, and it was about Sizemore and Clayton Rona just investigating cases and dealing with politics with the mayor,
put it into my veins.
I would love it. That's one of the things I actually could. To be honest, I could care less about the monster. I really, really like the characters.
In the room, Phil.
And sorry, no disrespect to Kathogo, and we appreciate your body, your body of stage work. but like Die Hard is, I think, is similar, and because it has a long setup, 30, 40 minutes of building the characters, building the interrelationships, so that when there's this great expression by Stephen King. We said, I try to create sympathy for my characters and then turn the monsters loose. That kind of applies to almost any type of storytelling, particularly horror, of course, but monsters can be, come in other forms, natural disaster, whatever it might be, right? In Die Hard, it's the terrorists, but that's what great storytelling, it's somewhat of a lost art. I could spend so much time with these characters, even if nothing happened. And I love that about this movie.
It's interesting you say that because I clocked last night watching this, like, okay, we're getting to the Cthulhu, and it's 52 minutes into the movie.
There you go.
When the if I remember correctly, when the banquet, the gala starts, right? The other movie that I thought of that comes out 2 years after this, which you could argue is a little bit more of an adventure, but has the sort of action horror DNA, is The Mummy, which is a personal favorite of mine. Like, I love that movie and the way it leans on the machine gun that Brandon Fraser is shooting in it. Like, it feels somewhere between action adventure, but it has like that hard edge of an action movie at times.
Well, it's fun. It's funny
similar
you bring
to Carpenter.
That.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I was thinking of his other movie, Deep Rising, while watching this. I feel like there's a lot
Which
of
we're gonna do. I think, it's on our list. We're gonna take it to the lab for sure.
Yeah, this reminded me a lot of that one. Although I think that one's a year after the Relic, but yeah, that one is so much fun and feels like that's a straight up action. Well, that is more adventure.
Speed 2 cruise control with monsters.
It is, yeah, right. Yeah, and a great creature design in that one too, just like this. But yeah, I love the characters and specifically Tom Sizemore, just because it's funny when I was watching this initially, because this comes in a weird period for him where it's like, the decline was happening a little bit, unfortunately, and I think it was like sort of building where his career was going. But I've always been such a big fan of his, and 2 years before this was Heat, which he's great in.
Ugh.
And in this, I was watching it and I was like, at first I was like, his presence as a leading man is so interesting because on the surface he feels like as an actor that he doesn't give a shit about what's happening around him, but then then as you're watching it, you realize like, no, like this is just this guy. Like this guy just is like so burnt out and worn out,
Thick
and it's
skin,
yeah,
kind of numb. Yeah.
yeah, and he's perfect for this kind of movie because everyone's losing their minds, and he just it's so funny watching him process information where he's like hearing about these leaves filled with hormones, and it's like the most like nonsensical like bullshit ever, and he's just processing it and immediately like, so how do we get some of these leaves, or like where are these leaves he likes to eat, like with the hormones, like he just is immediately like, all right, let's go get these leaves. It's just so funny.
It makes sense because it's sort of like what a detective would do. It's just gathering information in a dispassionate way. Let's move into our hero section then and dig in on this. We'll flip it round. We'll talk about Tom Sizemore as Detective Vincent D'Agosta first, as you've already, as we're already into it. As you say, it's a rare lead role for him. Typically, in this point in his career, he was creeping up the call sheet, as it were. He was, he'd been in. I mean, he first caught my attention and captivated me with his performance in True Romance as Cody Nicholson.
I was thinking about
him
that
and Chris
watching
Penn
this
together.
last
Like
night.
talk about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yeah.
Incredible chemistry, the two of them, and amazing just coming in as part of a big ensemble with some big names, and just for me kind of stealing that movie. So, and then it was like Natural Born Killers, as you say, Heat, goes on after this to do Saving Private Ryan, and I remember Spielberg saying like he saw a Steve McQueen quality to Sizemore and thought he was a lead. He was basically heading towards leading man status, but I think he was most effective as like the third or fourth, part of a really, really strong supporting cast. But it is fun to see him in a rare lead role. What are your thoughts on the character and the performance? Liam, I'm interested in your, thoughts on Size.
I think to Brandon's point, so I was thinking about like this in contrast to Heat and Saving Private Ryan. And to me in Heat, he's kind of like the teddy bear of the group. Like he's slightly codependent. He wants Neil McCauley to tell him what to do, right? But he's also the only one with a family. And then similarly in Saving Private Ryan, he's like an angel. You love him, right? He's a tough... But Tom Sizemore also played the mob boss and enemy of the state, which I think is just like an absolute heater of a performance. It's just chewing the pasta and like, get him out of here, get him out, get him out. But in this... what I think shines through in this movie is this kind of quiet intelligence. Like everyone sells this guy short, which I think is similar to McClane. Like
Barry McClane, yeah, absolutely.
There's this great piece of screenwriting where at some point he says to Penelope Ann Miller, "Are we still evolving?" And she says, "Some of us." And it's a great exchange within the context of the movie. And you know that she thinks he's just like some dumb
She's quite condescending,
Chicago
isn't she?
cop. Yeah. And I'm in love with Penelope Ann Miller
Yeah.
in this movie because I love science girls. But the way he asks questions and the way he evaluates things, he's smarter than anyone gives him credit for. And that's one of my favorite things about this performance. And I would love to watch Tom Sizemore on a procedural. Like, it made me think a little bit about Michael Madsen had a TV show called Vengeance Unlimited. I don't know if you guys remember this show, but
no.
Oh yeah, Vengeance Unlimited. It lasted
had pretty
one
parallel
season.
careers as well.
Yeah. Well, and they're part of that
They
group
look
of
similar.
post-Tarantino guys who kind of had these like little roles in Tarantino or big roles. But I would watch Detective D'Agosta, if I'm saying that correctly, show because I like how he sizes up a crime scene. I like how he talks it through. I like how he's kind of an asshole to his underlings, but also really cares about them. I love the relationship with what's the name?
Clayton Rohner.
Clayton Rohner.
I knew him from Murder One.
He's great in this movie.
Show.
Yeah,
and a weird show called G versus E that was like this sort of funny supernatural show where he was like solving crimes. He's great.
I just love.
They just look very
more.
similar though. Was the
Totally.
only thing I wondered about. The casting of that is kind of interesting because they're almost interchangeable.
Well,
apart
this
from
is a good
Sizemore being
Chicago movie,
bigger,
and Sizemore's from Michigan, so he's kind of like a
Detroit,
Midwestern kind of guy. And again, this is
fits,
something we
yeah.
talked about with Turbulence, is that this is the era of great white ethnic actors taking on big entertainments.
And
Ray
Sizemore
Liotta
actually had a TV show that was called Robbery Homicide.
Yeah.
That lasted for a season and was then cancelled so that he was given these shots, because people could see his potential. Unfortunately, his own demons sort of got the best of him, and his career was sort of derailed, but he kind of had a late career comeback. But it is interesting to see him as a leading man. But yeah, let's talk about the leading lady of this picture, who is really the lead.
Oh my goodness.
Penelope Ann Miller as Dr.
Penelope Ann
Margot
Miller.
Green. What I think's interesting about this is that she's not that likable on the page, but because the character, but because she is so likable, she's like kind of entitled, condescending to everybody, kind of thinks everybody's a little bit beneath her, is like a little bit hard to love. But I think because Penelope Ann Miller has so much natural charm and
one of the greatest
appeal.
to ever do these kinds of movies. She's amazing.
Like they're great together, aren't they?
They really
Brandon,
are.
what do you think of Penelope Ann Miller as Dr. Margot Green as the lead of this film?
Oh, I think she's great, and I think a little bit of that arrogance comes from who's to say if this was intentional or not, but she's like a woman in a very like man's world, especially as the movie goes along, because it's all these men running around with guns and everything, and she's like the only one who has like any idea on how to stop this thing. And I think I like her character a lot too. I think there's a lot of like real fun lived in moments for her. I love her computer that has like the car crash sound effects whenever she gets a notification. I love that. Like that felt so strange to me.
Yeah. Just so 90s. I love it.
But you don't question it. You don't question it at all.
Yeah.
It just works. It just totally works.
Yeah, but she's great. They have really fun chemistry together.
I think to your point, Brandon, something that I was thinking about watching this last night is that, like, the villain is the Cthulhu. Take it easy. But the thing that I think is interesting is the actual villain in this movie are the strivers. So it's people like the museum security guy who's just a dick. It's people like Greg Lee, who's like, gets her locked in the basement so that he can pitch to the wealthy, well-heeled rich people. And then it's the mayor, right? And so she's in a world of men who like don't actually really want to do the work but want to schmooze, and she's like, no, I just want to do the work. Like, I want to do my job. She literally says that. Because
Linda Hunt says to her, well, put on your best party dress and charm them, and she's like, I don't want to use my sexuality or anything that should be irrelevant. It's my intellect, my work should have enough value.
And Hyams gives her that benefit. Like, he really takes this character seriously. It feels a little bit like progressive in the way that Turbulence did, right? Where it allows the kind of female character to like transcend she kills the Cthulhu and says, see you in hell, which rocks, by the way.
It's also her ex-boyfriend. Or ex-lover.
Yeah.
That's the crazy, yeah.
I mean, well, let's talk about that. The villain of the piece, the Cthulhu, technically is a mutated version of John Whitney, played by Louis Van Bergen. So it's really interesting that there is that element that she knows him.
He licks her.
Mm-hmm.
Venom vibes. Like, it's really...
With a horrible CGI tongue that they have.
But it works. Shush, it works so well. Yeah, I mean... Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, just the creature design. Other than that horrible CGI tongue. I mean, it's Stan Winston, so it's off the charts. But you brought up Predator earlier.
Yep.
I forgot how much because I think if you remember anything from this movie, you're going to remember the creature design. And I forgot how much this looks like the Predator. It looks like a Predator dog almost. It's like, and some of these scenes, like, of course, some of it is CGI, but there are some moments where it's just walking around where it is practical, where you're just like, wow. Like, how did they do? Like, I love this weird in between period of practical and CG that 97 was in, where you see some stuff that, like, we'll get to the end where it's running around on fire and that looks pretty silly, but other than that, there's like a pretty like brain breaking bit of effects work in this movie where you're watching it and you're like, I just don't know how they're pulling this off, because it looks great for the time. It's a pretty special creature design.
I totally agree.
Where would this rank for you in the pantheon of movie monsters? You
Careful, because he's
Predator,
in the room. So.
Cover your ears.
That's tough, because I think if we're putting Predator and the Xenomorph on like the top tier and everything, I think that's got to be like the upper echelon. I think this is pretty close though. The one thing that I wish is that, again, this is such a dark movie that I feel like you don't always get the best look at like what it fully looks like. And I think I didn't get a great like sense of the geography of this monster, if that makes sense, like where it begins and ends and everything. but it does. I do think it's up there. It's like this big dog lizard thing that I just think is so.
It's kind of evolving. I think throughout the movie, it's kind of changing, as I recall, which is a really original aspect to it. But as we often say, they think the key with monster movies is actually to not show them, the Jaws being the classic example, right? That you should show them as little as possible. Predator does this in an ingenious way because it, you see it, you don't see it at first, but you see its hand, or you see, its camouflage, and it's sort of drip fed throughout the movie. But once it's eventually there full on, it also looks fucking amazing. And it can hold being like, the design is so strong that it can hold being in light, and you don't have to hide it. I think this feels slightly differently. It's not quite at that the level of the Predator, but it's also that's played by a human actor. As well, to bring it to life as well. But it's a really good one. I mean, as a monster movie, this is fantastic.
So strong.
As an elevated B movie, it's great.
And this does a great job of sort of slowly giving it to you, and then by the midpoint, the Cthulhu becomes like the third lead of the movie because you see it constantly. But I do like how you get bits and pieces in the beginning. The first kill, that would be the first kill in the museum with the security guard smoking the joint. I love that you just see its arm reach out and grab him. Like I think that's such a great evocative shot. But it's definitely up there is one of my favorite creature designs for sure.
I think one thing that
Cthulhu can take his earmuffs off.
Wow. I think one thing that Peter Hyams is amazing at is being a shoestring producer, in the sense that we don't see the Cthulhu in that scene where the guy's smoking the joint, but we see the push in on the joint and the amazing sound design that cost literally 1% that it would have cost if they showed the Cthulhu tearing the sky apart. And I think that all monster movies suffer from the last 10-minute issue where they show too much of the monster, they reveal too much. It's just like I mean, with the exception of maybe the Alien Queen in the greatest movie ever made, Aliens. But it's still, it really goes for it in the end, and it suffers a little bit. But I would say that Penelope Ann Miller sells that violation with the monster licking her so well that it doesn't even matter that the CGI is. And I watched this on a DVD. I went to a store here and rented it, and it didn't look good. It was an SD DVD from the 90s, right? Wow. So it wasn't amazing. I know it was a mistake. It wasn't, but I still was wow, this is she's so good in this little scene here at the end. And do they ever outright say that they're dating, or is it just implied?
I can't remember. That she was his ex-lover was what I got.
Okay.
I can't remember the specific details. Well, how does this function then in for you guys on the action level, which is our other fourth tenet of anatomy of an action movie? How would you rank this on that level? That any favorite set pieces, moments of action?
That's a tough one. I was thinking about this. I think as an action movie, just in general, I think Hyams has the language of action down so well that it's he keeps it going. He keeps it going at a good clip. It's very tense. I think it works very well as an action movie in that regard. I don't know if there's a lot of set pieces that I found I think the kills are great. I don't know how to say this. It's going to sound a little dismissive, but it's not. I don't think there's a lot of set pieces where I'm wow, that really stood out to me as a great action scene. But I think the kills are great, though. It's just all very effective to me, if that makes any sense. I mean, I love the final set piece. As silly as that CG is with the monster running around caught on fire, I think there's something so great about how on fire the rest of the building is around her. I think that whole set piece, it reminded me, I just watched, it's fresh in my head, I just saw for the first time Johnny To's Lifeline, which, was Hong Kong's answer to Backdraft. And that has some of the most insane practical fire effects I've ever seen in my life. Just full on rooms just enveloped in fire with the actors standing in the middle of it. I've never seen anything like it. And this ending reminded me of that a little bit. Of course, a lot of this is CG, but I really love that whole end set piece where everything just explodes. It's such an easy thing to do at the end of an action. We just blow everything up, and sometimes that can be a little boring. But I think this one does something really fun with it. It feels very atmospheric, that final, explosive set piece.
Yeah, it's really building. It builds on itself.
Satisfying, isn't it?
She runs through and knocks all the
Takes it to
chemicals
another
over,
gear.
and she uses her like scientific knowledge, like the quick
Exactly,
thinking,
yeah.
as a way to do this, and it's so strong.
And then enclosing herself in that case full of water and everything, just such a smart.
Clever.
Yeah.
Well, it's always great, when horror movies have smart characters, because often, obviously, a knock on horror movies is that characters make stupid decisions, right? But in this one, it is cool that audiences love seeing smart characters. I mean, digression. I just watched Chinatown yesterday. I don't want to go on a diatribe, a tangent about it.
No, please,
Save it for another moment. But like little moments, like where he puts the watch under the car, those kind of details where you're like, wow, this audiences love smart characters.
Well,
and she's a really smart character.
Well, that sort of reminds me of his son, John Himes, had a great movie during the pandemic called Alone. Or might have come out right before the pandemic, but I
saw that. That was great.
Yeah, it's just a tiny cat and mouse thriller, a girl being stalked by a guy. And what I loved most about that movie, other than the last 10 minutes do turn into a horror, it's a horror movie, but the last 10 minutes are a flat out like fist fight, which has incredible choreography between the woman and man, just like beating the shit out of each other. But that's like, a story for another day. But what I love about that movie is what we're talking about here is that also has like, I love a movie where, and the Relic sort of fits into this too, where the characters aren't making any mistakes. It's just the situation they're in is so like bad that it's just like they're making the right decisions. It's just still falling apart. And like, I like when movies do that. I like when you can see thought put into, oh, I'm going to do this in this situation. This makes sense. Well, that didn't work because, we're in dire circumstances. And I think this movie has a lot of that until the end, whenever it does work.
Yeah,
totally.
We talked about a bit with like Daylight, how frustrating it was when characters were acting in very unnatural ways or doing stupid things. Or, in this one, it does feel like even the people that are wrong, it's like the Fincher idea, like have everybody have the best argument for what they're doing makes for compelling drama, as opposed to just serve characters saying something stupid or wanting something stupid because it services the plot. Although there are a few panicky idiots in this, which brings us to
it needs
what I'm most
idiots.
excited about actually discussing in this film in some ways is the humor of this film. Which sometimes we skip over, but there's no way we're going to do it for this film because we love it. And it's so funny you caught this as well. When a movie has a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern double act.
Can I actually suggest who I first thought of in this is that they're Lenny and Carl from The Simpsons. That's like my first sort of like, this is the Lenny and Carl of the Relic, the kind of like guys on the sidelines being like, this coffee's terrible.
That bit is the bit I remember now most from this film. So for anyone that's confused, we'll talk about the characters of Bailey and McNally, who are the two beat cops lurking on the periphery of the action, played by John Kapelos and Tico Wells. So, but that moment, there's some amazing bits where he's like insecure about his ruffled tuxedo.
It's great.
And they're moaning about that's my favorite line, when he's like talking about the coffee. He's like, bitter. Very bitter. Meanwhile, there's like a monster running amok. They're
totally.
They are fantastic, and it's really telling that Hyams kept. That's the kind of stuff that could be cut, right?
Right.
It's actually one of the most entertaining aspects of the movie, and I think it's quite a witty film. But those guys are like brilliant together. They're great.
I also like, to Brandon's point earlier about Peter Hyams' quiet politics in his movies, is that like, there's a reading of this movie that we talked about earlier. There's critique in here about museum culture and the kind of like chauvinistic nature of that kind of environment. What I like about these guys is they're just like Chicago cops, and they're like, they would never in a million years be invited to a gala like this, right? So the kind of commentary on it like kind of points out how absurd all of this is, and how like the interplay of the mayor and the curator, Linda Hunt, who I love, and the sort of well-heeled people around her, like these two kind of like, truth tellers in the middle of it, like, this coffee sucks, my ruffles are ridiculous. And then they end up being quite heroic because they sort of function as like, protecting the people once this thing kind of falls apart. And I do think that there's something with that in Die Hard too, as McClane is the kind of like, guy in a sort of weird environment that he doesn't want to be in.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of those early scenes where McClane goes to the fancy, coke-fueled, indulgent, materialistic party of these corporate, executives, and feels probably like they do in this situation. It kind of reminds me, when you're at a wedding and you're sort of bitching with to your wife, about like the quality of the food, or it's too hot in here, or this music sucks, or it's like they are so fun as you say, the sort of truth tellers of this situation.
The Emperor Has No Clothes kids,
they're great. John Kapelos as well, I remember from quite a memorable actor. I remember him from his part as the cuckolded husband in Internal Affairs. And
wow.
Tico Wells has, speaking of the John Hyams, was in Universal Soldier, the original movie, as one of the techs. Yeah. So there's an interesting
Did Peter Hyams direct the original
connection? No, it was Roland Emmerich, but his son went on to do a bunch of those DTV sequels.
Which just screened out
here. Are very well regarded.
Week. Yeah.
And Peter shot one of the two John Hyams ones.
He did.
Yeah. I can't remember which, but they're both great. I think they're both. But Day of Reckoning is like a masterpiece.
Where does the story go?
Dad?
By the way,
it's like so.
Just tell us a bit about the Universal Soldier sequels and John Hyams' involvement with them, because I'm really interested in this.
So 2 is terrible. I kind of disregard that. I look at it as a trilogy of 1, 3, and 4. 2 is just not good, but it has a decent Jean-Claude Van Damme and Michael Jai White fight in it, but other than that, it's not that worth watching. But 3, John Hyams comes in and sort of turns it into like this sad, story of Jean-Claude Van Damme's Luc Devereaux being brought back into the fold, and he's like, he's brought back in because they're still running the program, but now they're creating like even more super soldiers, if that makes sense, like ultra soldiers, I guess. And he's brought in because one of them goes rogue and has to take them down. But the 4th one is where it's almost like an art house action movie. It's so bizarre. It's like, this is such an overused term. I don't love using it, but I think it fits here. It's the most Lynchian action movie I've ever seen in my life. It's like it stars Scott Adkins, who's like a DTV superstar, and he wakes up, or the movie starts with, it's like from his perspective, he's at home and there's a break-in, and I'm not going to go through the whole plot, but he's at home, there's a break-in with his family, his wife and daughter are murdered in front of him, and the intruders take off their masks, and it's Jean-Claude Van Damme, and that's all he remembers is that image. And so he's on this like hunt to find this guy, and you start to realize that like there's this whole sect of underground super soldiers who have broken off from the government, who are in a cult run by Jean-Claude Van Damme. And it's like, and it's bizarre. It's in that there's like this major twist in the movie that I don't want to give away for people who haven't seen it, but it's shot so evocatively. There's like these scenes of like, Dolph Lundgren talking to camera while there's a strobe light going on, trying to get him to break the programming of the super soldier, but he's talking to you through the screen. And it's it's a brutal movie. The fights are incredible, but I don't think I'm doing it as much justice as I should. I wrote a great piece on it.
I'm literally going to watch it today. So I'm like so on board for this.
I mean, I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I thought the piece was great. But
send it. We'll link it.
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah. But the main thing I want to say about it is that it really has some of Jean-Claude and Dolph Lundgren's like best acting they've ever done. They're both it's such a sad movie, and I think there's a great undercurrent in the movie of sort of letting go of it and just letting yourself die a little bit. And I think there's a great metatextual commentary on like the whole movie to me is about Jean-Claude and Dolph Lundgren, finally letting go of being the action leads that they've been for so long and ceding the limelight to Scott Adkins. And it's just, I think it's just a brilliant movie. And it's a testament that it's like having repertory screenings, in LA, like you just said.
It's very well regarded. And I know this is a bit of a tangent, but I do think it's all still in the same wheelhouse because Peter Hyams worked with Van Damme twice, with Time Cop and Sudden Death. Yeah. Time Cop in particular, I think is a really, really solid,
Time Cop
good,
slaps.
Great great supporting cast as well. The fact that his son directed these sequels, I know it's a tangent, but I do think it's relevant. But we are conscious of your time.
Wait, just want to say one quick thing, which is imagine you're directing a movie And your dad's like, I'll shoot it. And you're like, fuck. Like, my dad's going to be like, John, are you sure you want to do that? Like, I just can't even, I can't even imagine the parental pressure, you know? It's like if my son ever decides to podcast, I'm going to be like, just kidding. It's not at all.
I heard a lovely story about that, though, or something about how.
Oh, really?
Pete, I think he gave him a watch on his first day or something that had engraved on it, like, where do you want me, boss, or something to that effect. Like, it was something. It was really lovely.
Nice.
I think that was on 80s All Over. They did a great extra episode where they interviewed Peter Hyams and talked about his whole career, and he talked about his son and working on those movies. So, as a podcast that I
Peter
love,
Hyams on here. We should do that'd be great. Anyway.
So let's move on. Let's get our ruffled tuxedos and head into
Cthulhu.
Drink some bitter coffee as we head to the Die Hard Oscars.
Cthulhu sound. I don't know why I'm doing that sound.
He sounds like an asthma patient.
Exactly. Like that poor lady cleaning.
Yeah, there's a false scare. Yeah,
that's a good one.
So our first award is the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Award for Best Line. And I see quite a few nominees. I think it's quite a sharply written film in places.
Oh, yeah.
One of the ones I had that was great was D'Agosta, Sizemore saying, when they find out about the guard that was killed and that there's like a joint there or whatever. And he goes, pot's a misdemeanor. Decapitation seems a bit severe.
I love that.
That's so funny.
The one I had that I thought was hilarious, and it's such a tossed off line, and it means nothing to the movie. But when he has the mayor on the phone and he's trying to get the mayor to shut down the party or the big gala, and at the end of the phone call, he just goes, "Let me ask you something. How does someone get? How the fuck does somebody get custody of a dog?"
That's great. And in speaking of the mayor, I love the bit where he says to him, Sizemore goes, "And this is what we get: full size. With all due respect, sir, you can fire me on Monday, but right now I want you to shut your fucking mouth and listen."
I love that. Yeah.
And you're like, yes.
Yeah, that rocks. Well, especially because Sizemore doesn't couch anything, and I'm in a kind of silly action movie. He goes for the jugular, and it's you're kind of
very real.
I would be scared shitless of this guy.
There are a few moments where there's one where when he screams at Penelope Ann Miller to get out of there, and she's they're having their little back and forth. This is backtracking a little bit to his performance, but it just he is kind of scary when he screams. When he tells her to get the fuck out,
he has a lot of force.
It feels like your dad yelling at you or something. You're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah,
totally.
Well, I remember, my tweets, if I'm lucky, get one like probably from the Die Hard on a blank account.
No, it's your dad, P.D. Gothorn.
Unlike yours that blow up the internet, Brandon. But I do remember tweeting one time something to the effect, it is if you're watching a movie that was made between 1992 and 2001, is Tom Sizemore in it, and is he shouting? There's a high chance that it's a classic, right? There's something about when he shouts. Ray Liotta had that too, that does whoa, you kind of jump out your shoes. He also had there's also a great exchange with him and James Whitmore where he says, the older guy from Shawshank Redemption, it goes,
I love James Whitmore.
He's wonderful in this. That's why I could just watch them in the museum pottering around. How goes the gradual extinction of the human race, Lieutenant? I'm doing what I can to keep it orderly.
Yeah.
I love that bit. But then there was one other line that I just thought was great. Another sort of tossed off line by legendary actress Audra Lindley, who plays the medical examiner, Dr. Zwyzik.
She's amazing.
She's fantastic. Yeah. And she's had a crazy career. She was Phoebe's grandmother in Friends. She was in Three's Company. And she just goes so casually.
I know what you're going to say.
Lieutenant D'Agosta, it's lovely to see you under such alarming circumstances.
Well, I had the line about how she says, "Don't you hate people who take head but don't give it?"
Yeah. She's like an old lady, just potty mouth.
You just drop into this scene in the middle of the movie. You're like, why are we with this body 60-year-old? My only contribution is the one I already made, which is when Penelope Ann Miller asks him, he asks, "Are we still evolving?" And Penelope Ann Miller says, "Some of us."
Yeah,
it's witty. There's some good writing in it. For sheer blunt force, I'd probably go for the "shut your fucking mouth and listen."
Yeah,
just because that's like Sizemore at full.
I'm gonna go with takes head but doesn't give it because I wrote it. I literally paused the movie to write it down.
Some good stuff in it. The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for stealing the film. Quite a few nominees in this ensemble. Linda Hunt, who we haven't really talked about, as Anne Cuthbert, the museum curator. Fantastic. James Whitmore as Albert Frock, a fellow scientist, Margot's friend and mentor. Clayton Rona as Detective Hollingsworth, D'Agosta's colleague. Robert Lesser as the mayor. Robert Owen, I think he was very good. And, of course, Bailey and McNally, the two beat cops, played by John Kapelos and
Very
Chico
quickly,
Wells.
you know what movie Robert Lesser is in?
No, go.
You know what you do when you get off the airplane? You walk around and you make fists with your toes. He's the guy at the beginning of Die. Yeah.
My brain has just... Oh my gosh.
I'm shocked you didn't bring this up earlier.
He is the ultimate villain of the
He's the one who tells him to make fists
He
with
gives him
his
that
toes.
terrible advice. That's him.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, dude.
I knew he was familiar.
I was doing a little poking around last night, and so I put Die Hard on, and I was like, oh, that is him. Yeah, it's the make the fist with your toes guy.
There you go.
He's also one of those actors who wrote his own Wikipedia. I could tell from how it was written, which is cool. Good for him, But
he's a strong actor.
He's really good.
He's really good in that part. Who would you pick, guys, for who steals the movie?
I don't know if he steals the movie, but the one I was really drawn to was Hollingsworth, because I feel like that's a role that could have just been so easily, just forgotten, not put that much care into it. But you feel the relationship with Sizemore, in their scenes where, they're going back and forth in the walkie-talkie. And when, they're breaking apart, he's telling them to take some of the guests through this tunnel. I think that there's just such a trust between the two of them.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think Clayton Rohner is the best. He has an arc. He kind of goes from this bumbling idiot at the beginning to really saving these people's lives. And I think it's in the hands of a lesser director and a lesser actor, that could be a nothing part. But I think he steals.
He's a really strong actor. He had I don't know if you guys ever watched Murder One when it was on, but he had a great part in that. He's done some really good stuff. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie. I've got 3 nominees. Chi Moi Lo as the conniving Dr. Greg Lee. Thomas Ryan as Tom Parkinson, who is the insufferable head of museum security. And then Louis Van Bergen as John Whitney, the scientist who becomes the monster.
I know you're worried about your hypothalamus, but you can put the Cthulhu on the list despite him being in the studio.
But he's breathing down my neck right now. He's making me a little uncomfortable, to be honest. Could we remove him from the studio?
We gotta go with, I think this one to me is an easy one. I mean, as much as her colleague is annoying, and everything and wants to get ahead, I think the head of security is just
totally
such a doofus. Like at every turn, he's
the worst.
Can't handle his ego being stepped
sucks.
on. Yeah, he's my runaway winner.
I agree. I would agree.
He's sort of like the guy in Clear. I bring about this every time. The guy in Clear and Present Danger, who when they blow up that camp in Northern Africa, is like, yeah, we got him, and you're like, shut the fuck up. Like you're the worst guy.
Yeah. Patriot Games. Best death is Marco in the house.
The table. Next time you have a chance to kill someone, I had to do it.
Marco's been hybridized Marco's been taking too many hormones for.
This one's tough for me because a lot of them do, as fun as they are and as bloody and violent as this is, they run a little similar. There's a lot of beheadings. The one I really like though is when the SWAT team's there and the guy's being pulled up by the rope and he's trying to get away and he's like, pull me up, and they finally get him up, and then he stops talking and immediately you're like, oh, he's what happened. When they pull his body over the ledge, he's missing his legs and there's just a giant pool of blood. You're like, wow.
Yeah,
like that
it's not fucking around.
The beheaded security guard.
We're a hard horror movie.
This
in case you weren't aware.
Yeah, for violence.
SWAT team guy getting bisected was absolutely on my list. Freddie Ford getting killed on the toilet. Parkinson being decapitated, the head of security, and the Cthulhu's explosive demise were the other ones that
I think it's the Cthulhu because Penelope Ann Miller absolutely sells. You go to hell. Like, it's great. That would be my
playing
pick.
it very real. They both are, which I think is good. There isn't, I like that this film isn't winking at the camera. I hate that shit. I like that this is like playing it straight, playing it kind of, even though the film has wit, and some sense of the tone is like, I think for me, like, that's why I'm not a huge fan of Sudden Death, because I felt the tone of that was slightly too wink. in places, especially like when you're fighting the mascot and the absurdity of it, Whereas I like that this film like really kind of commits to the reality that is presented, and the performances, as you say, sell it,
Is the other security
agree.
guard the one who gets killed by the Cthulhu the second time, the guy from The Sopranos who plays Janice's partner, Richie? It's that guy, right?
Richie Aprile. Yeah, David
Aprile.
Yeah.
Kind of a heat check deck, and he just shows up. You're like, it's Richie Aprile. Yeah.
You're a classic, like as your white ethnic urban city
my white
actors,
ethnic theory.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
the '90s were the great era of the the late great period of the white ethnic actor.
Well, we're going to take a very quick break, get the Cathoga out here, and then we'll be back for our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz, where the scores can really change. We'll be right back. And we're back with our final section of the show, the Double Jeopardy Trivia Quiz, where the scores can really change. So, rules very simple. You guys can collaborate. Collaboration is now mandatory. So there's no competition.
Did the Cthulhu put you up to that? He's teamwork?
Out. I've had him kicked out, so there's no more impressions of the Cthulhu. He's gone. All right, question number 1. 2 of the Relic's principal cast members, Penelope Ann Miller and Linda Hunt, previously appeared together as professional colleagues and educators in which hit 1990 action comedy thriller.
Who is your daddy? And what does he do?
Yeah,
it's
go on, say it for the record.
Actually, 3 cast members.
I know. I had that. Yeah, I had that.
Did I steal a trivia quiz? Okay.
Just as a footnote,
Brandon,
that
are you a
Moilo
Kindergarten
also
Cop
appeared
fan?
as a dope dealer.
Oh yeah,
It rules. It rules.
Big fan. Yeah,
I love that movie. I rewatched it this year, and I was like, this movie is like a hard R until he gets to the school. It's like insane.
And then it's a hard R again at the end. Like, it gets kind of rough. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Great.
I love it.
So great.
Got to get that 4K that Lorber put out.
Yeah.
And there's also a kindergarten, speaking of Dolph Lundgren, there's a Kindergarten Cop 2 DTV in which Dolph Lundgren...
I haven't seen that one.
Wait, there is?
Yeah.
There is, yeah.
I've not seen it.
There's also a Sudden Death remake with Michael Jai White on DTV.
Really?
I love Michael Jai White, so I will watch that. I will watch that.
Question number 2. Penelope Ann Miller played a character also named Margot in a previous 1994 action-adventure film directed by Russell Mulcahy. Can you name that movie?
The Shadow.
Yeah, I knew it. I kept wanting to say The Phantom, and I'm like, no, that's not it. That's
about as close as you can get without getting the right one. I love The Shadow. Very briefly, definitely Penelope Ann Miller in the 90s in The Shadow in this. I was like pretty in love with her and Kindergarten Cop.
I don't want to brag, but Penelope Ann Miller once liked a tweet that I posted that was about Carlito's Way. So, I feel like we're homies.
I once liked a tweet Brandon put out about Miami Vice, so I think it's very comparable.
You were cancelled by association. Our final.
Brandon showed a movie to his girlfriend. How uncontroversial.
All right, now this is pretty torture. This is our final question in Convoluted Corner. Okay, the 2 dogs in the film are named after 2 famous Roman half-brothers from mythology, and they share their monikers with 2 key characters from which iconic, bombastic 1997 action movie. So the dogs in the movie.
Know.
Okay, you got it? Okay.
Yeah, but I want to give Brandon a second because I caught it and looked it up.
I don't think I caught the dogs.
I'll tell you the dogs' names. The dogs are named Castor and Pollux.
Okay, it's Face Off. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Is correct.
Also the greatest movie of the 90s.
And just
that's
in
coming
time
up.
It's
coming up on the show.
Just in time for John Woo's new movie this weekend.
Oh yeah, I think it's a series.
Is it a series?
I think The Killer is I think it's a series, but I could be wrong. Phil, do you know?
I just call it content. That's all I'm going to say about that. Our final, just a final question for fun. You've already won the million. You're already.
Yeah, we did it.
You're safe. You got your BFH, your bus fare home. In which 1993 action thriller does Tom Sizemore play Bruce Willis's cousin? Just for fun.
Oh wow! What movie are they in?
You should know this, Brandon.
Oh, I know.
Given
it's
where you're
set in
from.
Striking Distance.
Yeah,
okay, that was
the
a good,
ultimate Pittsburgh movie. I had to do that one for
I
Pittsburgh.
couldn't remember, and we've
totally
covered that
forgot.
movie
Real
on this
quick,
podcast.
are you a big Pittsburgh sports guy?
Oh yeah.
So how are you feeling about the situation at the Steelers this year? I'm just curious about the
I think
quick
I have
top line.
I think I have misguided hope just because I thought Kenny Pickett was so terrible that when they signed Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, I was very excited, even though I don't know. Wilson's on the definite downside of his career. I think Fields has potential. I don't know that their offensive line's terrible. We'll see. I'm hopeful. I think they're going to pull a Mike Tomlin special and go 9-8 and either
Sneak
make the
into
playoffs.
Yeah.
my girlfriend's currently gagging in the background because she's a Cleveland Browns fan, and we're not allowed to talk about the Steelers in this house.
Fair enough. let's let you out here and wrap it up. Brandon, tell us what you've got going on. Anything you want to plug? Where can people find you?
When will this air? Because
I can tell you, it's gonna air. It's actually gonna air Wednesday. It's a quick turnaround. This one.
So this will have already happened. I was going to plug in LA the Big Bad Film Festival, which is an indie action festival, but that's this weekend. But I have an interview in their program for one of the films there. But nothing going on right now. Working on a few things that are months away, but you can just find me on Twitter under my name. That's where I am usually. And
can you spell it for us?
It's Brandon, and then it's STREUSSNIG, and just
I imagine if you listen to the show, you might.
You're probably already fully aware, but just for anyone that isn't, we need to bring you to Brandon's Hive because he is genuinely one of, if not the funniest people I've seen tweeting about, especially action movies, not exclusively action movies, but your takes.
Thank you.
Really, really make me. LOL.
You're
hilarious, and it was great to have you on. Thank you for doing this.
And a personal thing that I am still working my way through because, good Lord, it's long. Is your Michael Mann super draft with Bilga and Roxana?
So just briefly, I'll say that was so much fun to record, and I feel bad saying this because they're great guys, but I had never listened to screen drafts before, and I had no idea that I was locked in for 6. We started at 1:15. My time, and we ended at 7:30 that day. I had no idea we were locked in for that long, and I was like, it ended up being so much fun and everything, but at the end I was like, who's going to listen to this? Turns out people are really enjoying it, so that's cool.
Yeah, I mean I've been listening to it for a while, and I was like, oh cool, 2 hours left, but of course I'll do it. I mean, it's great.
Do you do the pick is in music and the whole thing of like the actual?
I wish we did
NFL draft.
I wish they did. That would have been a lot of fun.
I really want that little do. Love it.
It's just I won't spoil the episode. I'm just too bad we weren't allowed to make trades or anything on draft day because there's a horrific mistake in that draft as far as I'm concerned because you get one veto and I used my veto poorly. I'll just say that.
I was going to say your number one draft was the keep, and everyone was like, "What happened here?"
Excellent choice.
All right.
Thanks, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon.
So
we'll let you go.
We'll have you back on though. We'd love to have you on again.
I would love to come back
this
on.
was great.
Yeah, we'll find some good movie to have you on down the line.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'd love to be back on. And it was good seeing you again, Liam. Nice meeting you, Philip. And this is a lot of fun.
Thanks, buddy.
All right. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, Brandon, for coming on the show. Long time in the planning. So it was nice that we finally made it happen. And what a gentleman of cinema.
A gentleman of cinema, a gentleman of Pittsburgh. We're great. It's funny. One of the things we didn't talk about with this episode was like Chicago on screen is probably my favorite city to visit.
Same.
Like in quotes, I mean, I love Chicago as a place. I love the people. I love that city. And I love the accent so much as well. So any movie that's set in Chicago, when it comes up on the list, I'm super, super happy to
unpretentious
go on a little visit there.
Totally. I totally agree. I love it.
Had a great time with this movie. Had a great time doing this episode. Do we need to do some... aren't we contractually obliged to do some bullshit about X?
Let's do some bullshit. I mean, look, the show is available wherever you get your podcast. We have it. Maybe you're watching this on YouTube because we're playing around with video now. So subscribe on YouTube if you're not there. We'll put a link in the notes. Send us an email, diehardoab@gmail.com. Yeah, what else am I missing? Leave comments on Spotify. Lots of ways to interact. We love to hear from you. I don't think we have any new emails. Let me double check. Let me just double check the situation.
Tell us about the action horror genre. Tell us about your favorite action horror movies.
Yeah,
like, am I missing something before Dawn of the Dead? You know, like, would love to get your thoughts on which, you know, would Resident Evil and Doom be considered Die Hard on a Blank movies? You know,
that'd be
things like that.
interesting.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So I was in Burbank today and I saw like 3 Cybertrucks in a row, and I was wondering how many of them do you tweet on X from? I'm losing.
I'm collecting them. I'm collecting them now. You know, I'm so into like the how I look driving them.
Yeah,
that I
you
just
look
need.
cool.
I need to have like different colors.
No, totally.
So I'm building up the.
I like
I'm building up the
purple
collection.
one. I thought that one was really, really cool. No, it's a good. Jeez. Someday I'm gonna see. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is losing its.
Every time I see one, I can't stop laughing.
Can I just tell you?
Stop laughing.
I see so many of them too here in California. I see
this
one
neighborhood
every day.
is filled with them.
Yeah,
and it's anyway.
That's okay. We're just living in Verhoeven's future, guys.
Indeed.
That's really all that's going on. That's all that's happening. Next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
Breakdown.
It's Die Hard in the middle of nowhere, and with some very special guests. Who are our special guests, Phil?
We are very, very proud and happy and excited to welcome to the show Justin and Laura Koo from the outstanding Cows in the Field podcast, where we've been lucky enough to be on their show discussing Public Enemies recently. You had been on previously discussing Starship Troopers. They have an amazing show. You're probably already very, very familiar with it, where they discuss popular movies and the philosophy behind them. Justin
in a very unpretentious way.
MIT professor of philosophy, is that right? Mm-hmm. So they're great. We had a great conversation with them. We know it's already happened. It is in the bank, ready to come out. Great conversation, great guests, great movie that, as you know, is better than Citizen Kane. Breakdown. That's my hot take.
Oh, the Cthulhu's ripping your head off as we speak. You know what? Because the Cthulhu is an aesthete. He has opinions about aesthetics.
He's pretty. He's
just very quickly.
Pretty,
I love to recommend
tough.
I love to recommend an episode of the show of their show, and an episode that I really liked recently was they had Glenn Kenny on to talk about Scarface, the 1980 De Palma movie, which 83, is it 83? Okay, yeah, which is a movie I've only seen once, and between you and me, I did not like very much at all, but I need to go back and revisit it. It's just never quite clicked for me. I think I was surprised by how insane it was, so I should go back and check
Dante's Inferno. It leaves you feeling awful. The interesting thing about like Scarface, such an incredible piece of bravura filmmaking, but it's also so morally bereft that it leaves you kind of feeling quite brutalized. I think.
Well, and they get into that,
which is the point of it, right?
Yeah,
so
they get into that.
Very interesting film to discuss, and it's just funny because I was thinking about De Palma today because I was thinking about Carlito's Way and the Penelope Ann Miller of it all, and how I think in some ways we've all kind of slept on like how amazing Brian De Palma is as a director, and we're going to be doing Snake Eyes eventually, and I'm so excited to look at his take on a Die Hard type movie.
Well, and we should talk about who we're going to have on that episode, because we already
the biggest
know
De
it's going
Palma
to be our pal,
fan out there. Yeah, you can probably guess.
Travis Woods. So we've been talking about that for months. So that's going to be really great. Yeah, I mean, let me be clear. Let me be clear. I love Brian De Palma. It's not a Brian De Palma problem. I just remember being so surprised, and I just have not gone back to Scarface. It's also very long. It's a long movie.
It is. So. It is. But yes, our next episode is discussing Breakdown, starring Kurt Russell, and we go deep on J.T. Walsh. One of my favorite actors of all time, one of my favorite actors in particular of this era. So join us for that. Don't miss, like, subscribe, do all that shit, and
we'll be back next time with Kurt Russell being a buttoned-up kind of East Coast shitty little liberal guy. Thanks, everybody.
Cool.
Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.